It's a real pleasure to welcome Eric Eyre today to PDYs. Eric is an investigative reporter at the Mountain State Spotlight, a nonprofit news outlet. And he's also a former State House reporter for the Charleston Gazette-Mail newspaper in Charleston, West Virginia. Eric was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2016. And in 2017, his investigation into massive shipments of opioids to West Virginia's southern coal fields was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. He is the author of the national bestseller, Death in Mudlick, a coal country fight against the drug companies that delivered the opioid epidemic. The New York Times book critic, Dwight Garner, named Death in Mudlick one of the 10 best books of 2020. The book also won an Edgar Allan Poe Award for true crime writing and an Investigative Reporters and Editors National Book Award. Eric lives in Charleston, West Virginia with his wife and their son and 2 cats. He's an amazing writer, and as you'll see, person. Eric, thank you for being here. Welcome to PDY.
Well, hi, Alan. Thanks so much for having me on, and really honored to be here with you.
It's my pleasure. I've looked forward to this conversation for a long time. So, let's jump right in. I mentioned in the introduction that you were diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2016. How did that diagnosis come about?
I had been having a lot of joint pain and stiffness, in particular in my elbow. I thought maybe it was tennis elbow at first or something I was doing with writing or typing. So I went to an orthopedic surgeon, and he had actually replaced my wife's hip about a year earlier. And, he did all the x-rays and all that and couldn't see anything wrong. So, but he said he sent me to this neurologist. He had a look on his face like something was wrong, but I didn't know. He didn't say anything about Parkinson's. So I went to a neurologist. It was on a Saturday. I was the only one there. And they hooked me up to one of those, I think it's called an EMG machine, where they kind of put little pricks on you and send little jolts of electricity. And I didn't, I went through that, and he didn't find anything wrong with like ligament damage or anything, but he said, I think you probably have Parkinson's. And then he had me walk, and he saw I was dragging my foot, and I had a little bit of the so-called masked face, where you're not really, moving your face that much, which I think I had that even before I had Parkinson's. But he then sent me out the door with a prescription for Sinemet, or carbidopa levodopa, as you know it. I tried that. It gave me a really weird smell in my head, and I guess the idea is if it would make my stiffness go away, then I would have Parkinson's. But if the drug worked, I'd have Parkinson's. Yeah. But I tried it, and it didn't really work, and then I wasn't taking it the way I should have. So I finally I was in a state of denial, disbelief, like we all are. And so I finally, at Marshall University in Huntington, there was only one movement disorder specialist in the whole state, and that's where I went. And he was like, basically, this is a no-brainer. You've got Parkinson's. You definitely have it. They put you through all those batteries of tests and all that stuff. So I still was in a state of disbelief, though more understanding. So we went to Ohio State University in Columbus, and the doctor there said the same thing. So then I finally, accepted it. I suppose that I probably had it a year or two before, because the first sign that I had was the micrographia, the small handwriting. And as a reporter, that's really important, because you're scribbling all the time in, one of these reporters' notebooks. Yeah. And so I was, having this trouble where you start out with large letters, and then gradually it gets smaller. It's just really difficult, and it gets smaller, and it gets smaller and smaller. So that was a telltale sign. And then the dragging of the foot. The stiffness I thought maybe was just age, or like I said, maybe just, overextended my elbow, but obviously it wasn't. So that's kind of how it came to be, and I guess it was July 2016, but here I am 5 years later.
Yeah, yeah,
Still here, still kicking, still alive and kicking.
yeah, and doing great. And we're gonna talk about some of the ways that's happening. But it's really uncanny as I listen to you. Your story is very similar to mine with respect to both symptoms and sort of looking back, there were probably signs that you now put together, but at the time you easily dismiss. I'm getting older, or my tennis game is responsible for my elbow or whatever. I think that's fairly typical. I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Um, so
Well,
what's it like to live?
I
Yeah,
was gonna say, just to add that, I was only 51 at the time when I was diagnosed. You were even a little bit younger, right? So
yeah, I was
I,
48. Yeah,
yeah, so I technically wasn't, I guess young onset, they say is 50 and above.
yeah.
So it makes it harder to believe when you're so young.
Yeah, but I've learned from, experts that I've talked to, and maybe you have too, that in some ways, 50 is a bit of an arbitrary number, right?
Yeah, yeah,
If the typical age is, 60 to 62, whether it's 51 or 48, that's still on the young side. And I think,
right.
some movement disorder specialists will say if you're, under 55, you have early onset or young onset. So I think it's
Yeah,
somewhat arbitrary, but it's certainly on the younger
sure.
side. That's
Yeah.
true. So you mentioned some stiffness and foot dragging. What else is, how else does Parkinson's affect you? What's it like to live not only physically, but, otherwise with Parkinson's for you?
Yeah, my biggest problem right now is dystonia in the right hand, which is kind of the clawing of the hand, or you can see, okay, I hear my left hand, I can go like that, but my lack of, I have a tremor obviously in my right hand, and I can't like open it fully. It's kind of difficult. So
Yeah,
that makes writing difficult. And as you know, I don't know if you have the same issues, but your brain wants to tell you to write fast, but your hands, I can write with my left hand, type with my left hand, and then one of the
yeah,
fingers on my right, only a single finger on the right hand. So you can't
yeah,
keep up, so that gets kind of difficult. Um, During the pandemic, actually, and we'll talk about it later, I did a lot of like a physical fitness maniac. I went crazy on physical fitness, um, which has increased my balance because I had some problems. I never fell, but I kind of tipped a little bit and had some balance issues. And now my legs are really stronger, and I don't have those balance issues, but the tremor just gets worse as this disease is so relentless that anytime there's like a crack of something that it'll take. Um, I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, my walking, manual dexterity, more anxiety than I usually have. I
mhm,
think a lot of that is when you're, and this didn't happen, maybe we benefited in the pandemic, but you're out in the public, like you have to give a speech or something like that. Um, you get real anxiety, and the anxiety brings out the tremor even worse. We've had people in our rock steady boxing class that, guy that didn't have any tremor at all. He's about 8 years older than I was, maybe 10. But he went to Seattle for a conference, and he said, I started speaking and my hand just started going crazy. I said, Dennis, that is totally normal.
yeah,
And you don't even realize it. But
yeah,
yeah, so the little bit more anxiety. My wife says my speech is a little bit slurred. Um, Trying to think what else. Oh, sometimes a little bit of my posture isn't really that good, so a little bit of back issues, and I've heard that a lot. And to be careful and to be really vigilant on keeping your back in good shape.
yeah,
A lot of people in our Parkinson's group have back issues, and when you
mhm,
combine that with Parkinson's, it's really difficult. Um, anyway, so those are my telltale symptoms, but obviously, everybody, as you know, everybody's different. I mean,
Right.
my right hand is dominant and shakes, but we got people in our class who are right hand dominant that have it on their left side. Oh, my foot claws a little bit. Um, so that, there's some dystonia in the foot, and my right foot hasn't gone to my left side. Um, the last meeting I had with the movement disorder specialist, who unfortunately is moving to Orlando, he strongly recommended DBS, deep brain stimulation.
Yeah.
I'm trying to hold off as long as I can on that. I don't know if you've had it, but there's been I've seen people who've had it, and there's been some really, really incredibly positive improvements, but others have had little to no success. So I'm kind of just I'm going to get it at some point. I just don't know when. Just want to hold it off as long as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you, I know people for whom DBS has been life changing, for the good. I mean, I've had people tell me, it turned the clock back 10 years or more for me.
Yeah,
And then, like you said, others who have, not seen as, as positive result as others have. And then a few people it hasn't, gone well for. And I think what I'm learning is that, you go through a lot of assessments and hopefully sort of get a sense of where you are and sort of the, predictive value of DBS, but it's not the same for everyone, just like Parkinson's is not the same for everyone. So,
right. And
um,
I think the DBS is they've made improvements on it as well. So the
yeah, for
longer I
sure.
wait, the more improvements. I mean, last person I saw that had it in class, she had like her iPhone. It was somehow she could make changes to it on her iPhone. Although
Yeah.
I worry if my wife gets a handle on the iPhone that she'll, I'm not doing my enough chores today. Zap.
Yeah, you have to be careful, right?
Got
You
to be
have
careful
access.
whose hands the iPhone gets in to
That's funny.
reprogram
That's funny.
my DVS.
Um, yeah, that's funny. What surprised you, Eric, about having Parkinson's? For better, or for worse, or both? What surprised you?
Oh, I think the biggest thing that we all think is that Parkinson's isn't just a tremor. I mean, it's a whole body issue and brain, obviously brain neurological issue. Um, just, I didn't know about, the stiffness, the things, the way it would change every day. I mean, when you meet people, they probably just say, they just expect to see the tremor. And if you don't have the tremor or you're taking enough meds and they're preventing the tremor, then they think you're just fine and dandy, but they don't know what's
Right,
going on inside. So,
right.
yeah, I think just that it's much more than a tremor. It's just manifests itself in many, many different ways.
Yeah. My friend Michael Westfall, who's had Parkinson's a number of years, has said it this way that Parkinson's makes you uncomfortable in your own body. And that's a sort of an image or a perspective that I've gone back to a lot of times because as you're saying, it may not, the discomfort may not be, obvious to the
Right.
person looking at you, but you may feel a lot of discomfort nonetheless. So I think that's an important point to make. You mentioned anxiety too. Studies show that anywhere from 40 to even 60% of folks with Parkinson's will experience anxiety at some point that, is acute enough to qualify for, an anxiety disorder that it needs treatment, right,
Right.
with medical interventions. And so that's one of the non-motor symptoms that's very common, as is depression.
Yeah.
That's not often known and certainly not often observable to folks who aren't aware of what to look for.
Yeah, we have a lot of people in our class that complain of depression.
Yeah,
That's a significant thing.
yeah. And it's a brain chemistry thing. It may be a change of life and ability and things like that too. But if your dopamine levels aren't right in your brain or other neurotransmitters, it's not a stretch to see how one could feel depressed or
Yeah,
anxious.
exactly.
Um, You mentioned rock steady boxing and tennis. What other things do you do to take care of yourself physically and otherwise?
Well, the number one thing I do is since the pandemic started in March 2020 is doing a lot of more running, track running, but I'm doing like sprints. I'm not like you, I can't do marathons yet. But I started out at the beginning doing, just kind of walking and then running, walk a half lap, run a half lap, and now I run three-quarters of the lap and walk a quarter of it and keep that up. Something happens, my feet are heavy, so I get this weird feeling of my feet slapping if I try to run like, let's say like 2 miles straight. So I do my 10 laps um, every day, no matter what, rain, shine, 95-degree heat today. I was really struggling. And another thing I found advantageous to help with my balance is walking the steps at the stadium where the track is. And it's also a cushioned track, it's a rubberized track. So you don't, because I know a lot of us have issues, get issues with our knees
Right.
and backs and all that. So, um, I'm just sold on the benefits of exercise. It helps, relieve anxiety. It diminishes tremor at least an hour or so afterwards. Um, I try to mix it up. I try to play tennis once or twice a week because that causes the coordination. It also kind of helps my hand.
Yeah.
Um, I just started trying a little bit of basketball too because the slapping of the hand. My wrist is so tight that it really helps loosen up my wrist.
Yeah.
Um, the boxing was put on hiatus for like a year and a couple months, but we're back at the gym. Well, we did virtual boxing, which was not, it was not, not the
Yeah.
same. Um, the boxing has been terrific. We at least once a month, a professional trainer comes down, so we do the mitts, the quick hands on the
Hmm.
mitts and hitting the heavy bags, and that's a tremendous thing. It's a great place to swap, meet up with people and swap our stories of what's working and what's not. I shouldn't say this, but we've even I have people that I'll trade medications. I want to try what you're trying, and we trade medications. That's not
Yeah.
advisable for people that listen to their doctors.
Yes.
Um,
Thanks for the disclaimer. Yes.
well, I mean, an example was I was in boxing class and I was complaining about my tremor, and they said you should try Mirapex. That's the brand name. I don't know what the regular name is. So I tried, she gave me some Mirapex. I traded her some Ropinirol that were giving me
Oh,
all
that's
kinds of
funny.
weird. I never liked that, and I'm not on that anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but then the Mirapex made me so sleepy that I was just like, I'd rather just have the tremor than to be,
Yeah.
asleep all day. Um, so yeah, the boxing. Oh, I also do a lot of like footwork drills. We have something in Ohio called Delay the Disease that does a lot of you do like karaoke steps and side steps and marches and high knee movements. So I incorporate that in on the track, like for my last two laps.
Yeah.
I find that, and then the big and loud. There's a big
Yeah.
and loud class on Tuesday, or sometimes out at the track, I'll do the big and loud exercises. Those are the ones that kind of open the body up, try to, do stuff like this and slap and all that,
Yeah.
and use your voice, to so you don't mumble like I'm probably mumbling right now.
No, you're doing great. Yeah.
So the
Well,
goal is every 7 days a week,
yeah.
an hour and a half, 7 days a week of something
Yeah. It
rigorous,
makes
and
a
it's got to
difference,
be.
right? It makes a difference. You feel
Yeah,
better.
I do. I mean, I really admire you. I wish I could do a marathon. Um, we got the we got the 5K coming up with the Michael J. Fox run. What's that in mid-September, I think. So I'm
Yeah.
happy with that. But I'll walk part of it.
Yeah.
So I sprint, walk, sprint, walk, sprint, walk.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, just moving is what's important, right? Whether you walk or run or play tennis or, do Tai Chi or yoga. I mean, walking is as good as anything, I think, if you do it regularly and at a pace that, pushes you a little bit, whatever level you're at. I always tell people when we talk about exercise, you don't have to run marathons. I mean, if you move, right, you can do
Right.
exercise sitting in a chair if that's your
Yeah.
capability. There are lots of, ways to do that in community. And so just moving, I think, is the key. However you do that, it's really up to you and what your interests and all of that are.
Yeah, and
Um,
prior to the pandemic, I did most of my running on a treadmill, which is probably good because they've had studies that show that treadmill works. But I
yeah,
don't think it is as good as actual running on a surface. I
yeah,
think you get better muscles, better for helping you walk and, keeping your knees up, not dragging your feet.
yeah,
Because when I was on I tried the treadmill back in that brief period we had. I went back to the Y when COVID had ebbed. Of course, now it's come back. So,
yeah,
so I haven't
yeah,
gone back to the Y, but I kept dragging my foot on the treadmill, and it was
yeah,
like thump, 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 thump.
yeah. That could be precarious too. I've
Yeah.
learned
I mean,
personally.
biking would be good, but
Yeah,
I'm
biking's
worried I'd
great.
fall and get killed by we don't have a lot of bikers around here.
Yeah,
So in West Virginia, it's not a big
yeah,
exercise activity, so I don't think most people are looking out for bikes when they're driving.
yeah.
So
Anything that gets your heart rate up, I think. I mean, that's what I've learned. That's the key. So I'm going to pivot just a little bit. You're diagnosed in the summer of 2016, and then in 2017, uh, you're awarded a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. Right, talking about what I imagine going from a low to a real high professionally. I mean, that's the preeminent award for a journalist among other writers. Talk about that. That's just very impressive. I don't know that I've ever spoken with a Pulitzer winner before, so it's a real honor to have that opportunity. But tell us about that.
yeah, that resulted from actually years of reporting. I set the table for started on that and back in 2013, and then um, it basically we did a short series of articles on basically the costs and the causes of the opioid epidemic, which has hit West Virginia harder than just about any place in the country. And what I got my hands on after a lot of legal battles was some data from the DEA that reported the shipments of opioid pills like OxyContin to the state of West Virginia. And when I looked at the data, it was just shocking to see the number of pills that had been flooded into, in particular, the southern coal fields of West Virginia. Um, you had situations where you had a town of like 400 people getting nearly 9 million prescription opioids delivered to them over a 2-year period. So it was just
Wow.
impossible to believe. And the DEA had put out warnings to the distributors. There'd been a lot of reporting, and I did a lot of reporting on bad doctors and bad pharmacists and um, manufacturers like Purdue Pharma that lied about the addictiveness of OxyContin.
Right.
But these middlemen, these distributors, were complicit in the whole thing, and um, they had an opportunity to sort of cut off the flow of the pills into the state, but they turned the faucet up to full blast and let these pills in. And what we ultimately found was not surprisingly, the counties that had the most number of prescription painkillers per person also had the highest drug overdose death rates in the nation. And it was just a massive problem. It affects just about everybody here. Everybody knows somebody that's
Yeah.
died of an overdose. So that all came out, and yeah, I was shocked that I kind of wrote the final story in December. Um, just as like a little as a Sunday story. It wasn't. I may have won the Pulitzer with the shortest stories ever in the history of the awards because I thought it was only a Sunday story. But it got, I don't know what the timing of it was, but the timing came out and there was a lot of buzz about the opioid epidemic, and the story went crazy on the number of hits and everything. And uh, I was on like CNN and all MSNBC and even Fox News. talking about the stories. Um, but yeah, then it came completely out of the blue, the Pulitzer Prize. I had thought, I'd seen over the years, seen these pictures of like people at the Washington Post and New York Times, having these big celebrations in the newsroom when they won the Pulitzer Prize. And, I didn't get any heads up that we would have won, but I thought they would giving them heads up. But then I realized the New York Times and the Washington Post, they win multiple Pulitzer Prizes every year. So
Yeah,
so they're quite ready for
yeah,
the announcement. It's just the
yeah,
question is how many, but they usually
yeah,
don't go into small papers like ours.
yeah.
I think we were the I think it helped probably that since it was a rural area and this was such a small paper that it probably actually helped me.
Yeah, well, but what an affirmation, I think, particularly because it's a small market paper and, a set of issues that, we know more about now, thanks to people like you, than we did a few years ago. But I think that's just an extraordinary accomplishment and really admire you and your work for many reasons and glad that others, your colleagues, recognized your work too. And then you wrote Death in Mudlick. Talk about that. I mean,
Yeah.
speaking of, being recognized as a real contribution. I mean, you're winning book awards. It's a national bestseller. Tell us about the book.
Yeah, so after I won the Pulitzer, I didn't know this happened, but a lot of people, a lot of agents contact you, a lot of publishers contact you, and they said, "Do you want to write a book?" And I'm like, "Nah, I don't know. I don't really, never thought about writing a book." But then I heard of other people who were from the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they were going to be writing a book about West Virginia, and I was like, hold on. And it was such an important issue to the state. So many, it had ravaged so many families, and I thought it might reach a different audience and another audience with the writing the book. So the book basically starts out in the town of, it's actually a holler called Mudlick, where uh, a fireman dies of an OxyContin overdose, and his sister, from that point forward, said, "I'm going to hold people accountable for his death. He didn't deserve this. I don't want him to be another statistic." Her name was Debbie Priest, who I met in early 2017. Although she had started this fight against the drug manufacturer. Well, actually, she started against the doctor that prescribed it and the pharmacy that dispensed the OxyContin to her brother, and then it kind of just went up the chain till she got to this distributors. She was actually following like these vans that came in to, on a daily, sometimes twice a day, to make these giant deliveries of opioids to these small towns across the southern part of the state. So it kind of just follows her. I kind of come into the story in the middle of it, and it chronicles, basically a small community, coming together to fight off some of the largest companies in the United States. These three companies that are in the book, McKesson, Cardinal Health, and AmerisourceBergen, are all in the top 20 in the Fortune 500.
Mm,
I think McKesson is like the sixth biggest company in the nation, and through all that stuff that she had started, now there's like 3,000 some lawsuits filed against distributors and manufacturers.
yeah,
But the book kind of takes you through there, and then I've got the subplot of the local news, trying to survive local news. We had a lot of setbacks at the paper. Our paper actually went bankrupt a year after we won the Pulitzer. So
mm,
there's sort of a subplot that runs through it about the importance of saving local watchdog journalism.
yeah. Well said. What are you working on these days?
Well, I'm working, I was full-time, but working now part-time for a nonprofit news outlet called Mountain State Spotlight. Um, it's would be very similar to, but on a much smaller scale, to the Texas Tribune, if you're familiar with that.
Sure.
It's online only, supported by foundations, actually American Journalism Project, but the main guy that funds that is from Texas. Somehow, like basically most of our money, other than contributors, donations, comes from foundations in Texas. So we thank you for
Interesting. Yeah.
helping us.
Glad to
But
contribute. Yeah.
it's online only, and I'm still covering the opioid crisis. We just had a big trial that concluded a couple weeks ago in Charleston, the city of Huntington, and the Cabell County, as it's called, which at one point was sort of ground zero for the opioid epidemic. They sued the distributors, and they had a trial, and we're waiting there wasn't a jury, it was a bench trial, so it was just a judge, and we're waiting for his decision on that trial.
Yeah. What gives you hope, Eric, as someone who lives with Parkinson's? I know you to be a hopeful person. What gives you hope?
Well, for one thing, it seems like there's a lot of research going on. Constant, I read the like Parkinson's news today, and there's always some sort of something, whether it be stem cells or advances in DBS or advances in therapies, different drugs that slow progression. Now, I kind of go overboard. If I see like a phase one study that something's working, and if it's like a a vitamin or something, a supplement, I'll just order it on Amazon or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I remember one, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like creatine or something like a couple of years ago, that it got to like phase 3 that it was working, and then it failed in phase
Yeah.
3,
Yeah.
like a lot of things do. The fly model, you have the fly model, and then you have the mouse model. But when it gets to the human beings, our brains, I guess, are a little trickier than the
Yeah.
fly brain. So, all that stuff going on, new therapies, new progression. We got, groups like PD Avengers that are out there fighting for, cures and to prevent Parkinson's. You, of course, have the Michael J. Fox Foundation.
Yeah.
So there is a sustained effort to, find a cure. Uh,
Yeah.
so, I have hope that someday we will have a cure.
Yeah, I tell people, and I mean it, that there's never been a better time to have Parkinson's. And I think the research side and the advocacy side, all of that are why that's the case. I mean, there's just a lot of energy around neurologic diseases, largely red, but certainly Parkinson's a key focus among them. So I'm with you. I think, the smart money is on real, game-changing advances in the next decade or less. I really think we're close. I'm told by smart people that we're close on this, and I believe them.
Yeah,
Um,
in our class, we have at least one person that's doing a study on the cell therapy, and I may be missing something, but he's had, for the 3 years, or how many, trying to think how many years. No, we've been in class for 5. I mean, he hasn't shown any, actually he's improved. He used to have um, what do you call that when you have the frozen gait when you can't walk?
well, freezing.
Freezing,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
freezing. And he doesn't have that anymore, and he's not stiff. So
Yeah.
I think there's some real things out there that, may slow progression. Um, there just hasn't been a breakthrough drug or procedure yet, but
Mhm.
I have some hope that we're going to get there at some point. Maybe not in our lifetimes, but maybe some, for the kids and all.
Yeah. And you mentioned PD Avengers. I want to give that group, and particularly Larry Gifford, a shout
Yeah,
out, because that's really important work. And we need the medical side, we need the policy side that
yeah,
allows for good research, and more people to be served by treatment and have access to, movement disorder specialists and medication and all that. So I really appreciate the work that Larry and that group are leading, and the way of PD Avengers. So thank you for mentioning that. I want to ask you one more question, and I could talk to you forever. We'll have to do this again, sometime down the road. But
Well, I was hoping to come to Austin. There's a health journalism conference that was supposed to be, I think, next month, but of course it got canceled.
yeah, well, you have a standing invitation. I would love to host you in
So when I
Austin.
get to Austin, I will look
Yeah,
you up and we'll
please
have
just let me know you're coming. We'd love to host you. But if you could say, one or two things to your newly diagnosed self and really, to others who are newly diagnosed who are listening in, what would it be if you, looking back 5 years, what do you know now that you wish you'd known then? I mean, you could frame it how you want, but what would you say?
Sure. The number one thing I would say would be number one would be to make exercise, high intensity exercise, a priority. I did exercise like 3 days a week for like the first couple of years, but I don't think I did it enough, and I didn't push myself hard enough. I'm talking like pushing yourself till you're just like gonna drop.
Yeah,
Um, because that's still I still think exercise is the best medicine, and it also I don't know if it's definitively been reported in studies, but it seems like it really does slow progression, so it gives you more time. Um, I mean, another thing is this is hard to do, but especially because of COVID and everything. But if you can, try to remove as many stressful things in your life. Like I moving to part-time is status has been really great because I couldn't imagine, going back to covering our crazy legislature on a daily basis and having stress over, can I finish this story on deadline? Because
right,
my hands are freezing up, and then when the pressure gets on, then you get even more shaky.
right,
So just look at those, I should have, I try to tell people, look at the stressors. Um, if you can, retire, or I know you're probably still full time, but if you're enjoying it now, if it's not a stress, then by all means go for it. But try to reduce the stressors. I mean, as you said in the beginning, keep moving, keep going. The other thing, I would say is the final thing was. It's Parkinson's is not a death sentence. There's still much more you can accomplish
mhm,
even with it. I mean, people, every, when you get 50 years old, there's a lot of people that got a lot of different other problems besides
mhm.
Parkinson's. But there's more stuff to do. There's more stuff you can accomplish even
Yeah,
as an old age. I thought when I first was found out I had Parkinson's, I thought, oh God, I've probably got like 5 years, 5 years left or something.
right,
Um, I didn't really read the research that well. I was looking for the negative, but um, yeah. I mean, it is, it's no fun. It ain't fun. It's gonna be a challenge every day, but there's plenty more you can accomplish even with Parkinson's.
yeah. You can even win a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, even a Pulitzer, that's right.
Yeah. Well, it's really an honor, Eric, to have you speak with us today. Real pleasure too, and really admire what you're doing and who you are. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. I know it'll be helpful to a lot of people, and we'll have you back soon and come to Austin.
Well, I do plan to come to Austin. I've never been to Austin. I'd love to come to Austin. And thank you for so much you're doing for raising awareness. You've set the bar pretty high, though. I wrote one book when I had Parkinson's. I think you've written three.
Well, I don't play golf.
Poetry,
I have to do
counseling, and
um,
essays, and all the work you're doing on the website. It really gives us inspiration and hope. And um, I know you're a workout warrior. I have a feeling you're a workout warrior too, because you look great.
uh, thank you very much, and right back at you. And we look forward to doing this again soon.
All righty. Thanks so much, Alan.
Take care, pal.
All right.